Welcome back to Trading Day. Time to focus on the M&A space, and the ACCC has flagged concerns about the near $9 billion bid for rail and port operator Asciano from a consortium led by Canada's Brookfield Infrastructure Partners and Cube Holdings. Well, to take us through the implications of the delay, Simon Siegel from Deal Reporter joins me live in studio. We're also joined by Paddy Crumlin, National Secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time. Paddy Crumlin, I might start with you, and just a bit of background, because no doubt the MUA would be taking a very big interest in what's happening at the moment, because you have ongoing negotiations with Asciano.
Yeah, sure. But we see that as separate. That's part of an industrial continuance. It's a 4-year agreement. We've been seeking to have stability in the workplace with the company as we practically can. We don't expect those things to change with any merger, and in fact, we know Cube. And I met with Brookfield in New York a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, we're just basically looking to have business as usual. We're committed to the long-term, productivity within the workplace, and we don't think that should change in any merger. But we need assurances, I guess. But it shouldn't interfere with the negotiations.
Chris Corrigan, obviously chairman of Cube, has a long and rich history, I suppose, is one way of putting it, with the MUA. I mean, would there be concerns over having him involved again?
Not at all. We've got a relationship with Cube in bulk and general. I worked with Chris for a long time when he was the CEO of Patrick's. I became National Secretary in 2000, and we've got a functional relationship. I mean, Sam Kaplan sits on the board of Maritime Super. I mean, these are people we know, and, they've got a certain management style about it, but there's nothing wrong with that, and seems to be somewhat different than Brookfield, and I guess they need to reconcile that. Yeah. That's a question, but it's only a question that needs an answer.
So there's no urgency from your perspective, Paddy, to settle before this deal? It's not going to make any strategic difference?
Well, the settlement is based on genuine engagement, and consensus with the company. We want a functional outcome that's going to sustain the business from a Labor point of view for the next 4 years. That's what's important. The merger, to that extent, is a bit of a distraction. We didn't ask for it, but we'll accommodate it. That's our responsibility. But we expect also the merger partners to accommodate us and the general direction we've been moving in. Productivity, functionality. That's what is going to drive stevedoring now and into the future.
But if we can just look a bit broader, what are the implications, to generalise horribly, of corporate mergers, on trade unions, on the workforce?
Oh, a mix. You'd have to say the BHP merger with Billiton was a bit of a disaster. That was what the Australia that we would have preferred, horizontal and vertical integration between commodities and value added. We didn't get that. We got a bunch of international CEOs that came in and went away with a lot of money, a disaggregation of the company, a liquidation of assets, and now a company that's dysfunctional. And now, that's tax minimisation seems to be one of its core values. And the other side of it is some of the things that are going on in Brazil. Chronic, governance failure. And then industrially, they're now replacing our members that help build the wealth of the company with other Australian workers with partnership agreements to avoid an employer-employee relationship on their tugs at Port Hedland. Very dysfunctional merger, that one.
But that's a particular merger. I mean, would you sense that that's a generic problem with corporate mergers?
It's partnership, isn't it? And these are public companies. I'm on for institutional investors in Washington, and the SEC recommended 3% of shares for 3 years gives you proxy voting rights. These are public companies. Now, they're allowed to merge, and if they're adding value and it's done on good governance terms, good transparent leadership, what's wrong with that? That's what productivity is about. That's what drives productivity. But it's got to be transparent, and it's got to meet certain values and expectations. Now, that's a case-by-case basis.
And what do you see, generally speaking, as the role, if you like, of union and workers when it comes to particularly these large-scale sort of M&A activities that we're seeing? How closely involved should unions and workers generally be?
Well, we've been there. We've seen many changes at Patrick's, for example. We're at Corrigan. You know, before Corrigan, it was Australian National Line. Yeah. It was privatised, and then, you know, then we're at Malcolm Broomhead. Before him, Rosethorn, with the breakup of toll. I mean, this is, I won't say rogues gallery, but there's been sort of many of the usual suspects in the joint have come through. John Mullen. So we've seen the sort of the circuitous door of executive change, but they're the same workers. We've delivered the productivity. We've continued, you know, to deliver all of the things and the expectations upon us. So we expect to have some ownership of the value that's added, and also some introduction, you know, and some part. We're shareholders. We're genuine shareholders that partly drive the productivity. We're labour productivity. Many of the pension funds are also investment. The two big Canadian pension funds, one sitting behind you, one sitting behind Brookfield. Now that's a contradiction, you know, not-for-profit pension funds driving the price up. It is complex, and there's lots of reasons for us to be engaged in intelligent, you know, and transparent fashion. Fortunately, we know, you know, Brookfield, and we know... see, Brookfield's multiplex. Multiplex talk about mergers, and we're merging with the CFMEU. So it doesn't happen only in the corporate world, James. You know, so there's all sorts of opportunities here if you want to look deeply enough.
I'd be curious to get some sense about your experience of corporate mergers as opposed to your merger with the CFMEU. I mean, how would you differentiate it?
Oh, it's the same values. I mean, you know, you're looking to increase the scope of service. Unions provide service to their membership. Legal services, we're in the area of support, social support, EAPs, employment assistance programs, you know, the area of superannuation advice, you know, many research. I'm the president of the International Transport Workers Federation. You know, we're sitting down seeking to engage workforces with corporations at a high level, and that means you've got to have the resources, you've got to have, you know, the maturity, you've got to have the structure to properly add value to those workers' lives. They pay for a service.
The role and influence of the unions, what it was, though, because certainly it's something that's been called into question in recent times, particularly at a political level, if you like, whether or not that membership level is what it once was, and as a consequence, whether or not the influence of the unions is or should be what it once was.
Well, it is. Where there are unionised workforce, of course it is. You're better off negotiating between a workforce and an employer than an individual and an employer, because it's about economies of scale. It's about stability of outcomes. It's about securing long-term outcomes that everybody understands, regardless of their personal viewpoint and regardless of what their priorities may be, what is in the best interests of those workers and what is in the best interests of those businesses, and how can you put those two interests in alignment? How else can you do it? It's like separating voters from the government, you know. This is intrinsic. Social dialogue is intrinsic to human development, and that's not going to change, James.
On that point, we have to leave it there. Mr. Crumlin, real pleasure having you on. Thanks very much. Simon, a pleasure to see you as always. See you next week. We need to take a break. On the other side, Ingrid Willinge will have At Lunch.
Have you ever looked for a hotel online? Did you notice that there are so many different prices out there for the exact same room? Trivago searches hundreds of websites at the same time and shows you the most popular hotels. You can then easily compare all the hotel rooms that meet your search criteria and find the room that is ideal for you. Remember, Trivago shows you all the different prices for the exact same room. And that's how you can be sure that you find your ideal hotel for the best price. Hotel Trivago.
If something were to happen to you,
how would your other half cope financially? What about your children's future?
how secure would your family's financial future really be?